To the Defense and Aerospace Report, I'm Vago Muradian here at the National Press Club in downtown Washington, D.C. at the conclusion of the annual ComDef conference, one of the world's most important security cooperation gatherings. Full disclosure, we're a media partner with IDEA, the organizer of this conference, and we're honored to be talking to my good friend Byron Callan of Capital Alpa Partners, leading independent equity research firm, and also a regular contributor to the Defense and Aerospace Report podcast. Byron, you were here from the very, very beginning all the way through the bitter end. What were some of the key takeaways and messages you heard from this panel? Whether it was in terms of policy, big strategic issues, or even just sort of the nitty-gritty, given that legislation has completely changed the entire security cooperation environment, as well as the entire acquisition environment as well, as the acquisition organization has been split up, and there was some conversation about that. Talk to us what you saw as the key takeaways.
Well, I think this was different. It definitely signaled a new era in defense cooperation. I think it was this is always a great conference. It's a good way to kind of start the fall season. The organizers do a great event of getting, really the key people who matter in discussing this issue. The difference this year was it was very much a U.S.-centric approach. The new era in security cooperation seems to be more of a focus on improving U.S. export policies, making it easier for U.S. companies to deal internationally, but not so much on how do you cooperate with European, Asian, Middle Eastern allies. There are some subtitles or subtext to the discussions about this, the demands of localization, I think, as one presenter talked, but very much a U.S. focus, and I think that's kind of a change from maybe some of the prior ComDefs that I've attended.
Do you think that there was enough nitty-gritty specific in how we were going to get to some of these, or rather more sort of like, yeah, we got to do this, that's on the to-do list? I mean, still a lot of encouraging work that's going on, right? I mean, the national security strategy.
The national security strategy, absolutely. Big emphasis. This is a very top-down framework that's been set by the Department of Defense. But I think where it really gets down to is other countries have national defense interests too. They're not just going to take American exports. And as we've talked about before, things like the Tempest program in the UK involves Leonardo, Rolls-Royce, BAE Systems, open for international partnerships. The Saudis are going to be on this. So what's the U.S. strategy to deal with that? I didn't hear that discussed today.
Do you think one of the issues that was not discussed as public, we did talk about it on my panel discussion, but in private, a number of different representatives, I mean, there are more than 20 nations represented, if not more than that, annually at this event, from NATO nations, Asia, all around the world, Australia, Canada, particularly well represented, UK, France, of course, a key delegation, Sweden. But one of the challenges was that it is a tale of two administrations. On the one hand, you've got the national security strategy and the national defense strategy who say all the right things. At the same time, the president's tweets are an issue and appear that some of his comments regarding foreign leaders may have cost the United States at least some programs, or appear to have delayed some programs. Germany's interest in Joint Strike Fighter doesn't appear to exist anymore. In fact, Germany announced its partnership with France shortly after that decision was made. And then you've got the issue with the Canadians, who looked like they were going to go for the F-18, and then there was the whole Bombardier issue. Then ended up it was going to be F-35, and then the president called the Canadian Prime Minister, a liar, and Canadian officials in their very nice way point out, well, that's a little bit of a challenge now. Do you sense that there was enough conversation about that? Were people just putting a happy face on this, or do you think that this could have certain deeper repercussions at a time when we're in a very, very competitive global industrial base, where Sweden is pushing its version of the Gripen, the latest version of the Gripen, France is, has some buoyed export prospects on the Rafale. How do you see this environment?
It really depends. I mean, this conference is taking place, the same time the 2+2 meetings are taking place in India. So there's clearly been a very interesting new opportunity that may open up in India, and how U.S.-Indian defense cooperation could evolve. But for the older allies in Europe or Canada, not so much. Korea, Japan, I think part of this, they get involved in the Section 232 steel and aluminum investigation. So it's a lot of cross currents. Frankly, I didn't hear much discussed. Certainly in the public forum, like I said, this is much more of a U.S. focused, U.S. optimism, a series of very optimistic presentations about how the U.S. is approaching defense cooperation. But you're right. I think the flip side of that can be maybe there's a little bit more concern, skepticism, pushback. Hey, have you really thought through this through? You know, if you're about to implement tariffs on our automobile industry, that has national security repercussions for our industrial base. So none of that got discussed today.
By the way, there was the sidelines. I'm not saying a betting pool, but there were a number of people who were going around saying, "So auto tariffs? What do you think? Yes or no?"
Yeah.
There was a little bit. I don't know. How do you handicap this? Do you think there'll be auto tariffs?
Not before the midterm elections.
That's very cynical, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is, but I think they're really that's a bomb to drop, and that'll really that affects everybody in the United States. You know, when you start talking about the dollar increases in automobiles, it's fascinating what it does even to things like the cost to repair your automobile if you've been in an accident, what that does to insurance rates. So it's a nuclear option. They haven't stopped the study. As a matter of fact, in one of the panels we heard about how 232 investigations were basically taking up a lot of time in the BIS office in Commerce. So. Right. This stuff is proceeding.
Let me take it at least on a little bit more of an optimistic track. If you look at it, on virtually every point that in the past might have been disputed, looks like that there is progress that's being made on it, that there is an enterprise-wide approach. Talk about a little bit of the positive stuff that's happening, because it does look like there's enormous progress on at least addressing some of the fundamental issues to try to accelerate and have a more agile system ultimately.
If I'm a U.S. company, attending this conference today, I came away, wow, this is all music by ears. You've got a conventional arm transfer policy. You're getting a lot more kind of kumbaya, so interagency progress. You've got the top cover of partnerships. You've got, the U.S. government trying to get much more behind U.S. exports and a champion of U.S. defense products. But as I said, the flip side of this, if this is about international defense cooperation, cooperation isn't necessarily having all these other countries just buy our defense products. It goes two ways. And maybe that should be the discussion for next year's conference.
Byron, thanks very much. I hope you feel better, because I know you've been nursing a cold all day today, so nothing like being in a conference and getting up early to come down here from Connecticut. Thanks very much.
Box of Kleenex. Thanks.